The Introduction to the Old Testament, Unit 16, Judah Alone. In the last lecture, we finished the kingdom of Israel in the north and gave the reasons why God brought it to an end. In this lecture, we're going to deal just with Judah. Judah lasted for a long time after the northern kingdom of Israel. And we are introduced to the king who is probably the worst king that the nation of Judah ever had, and that was Manasseh. He also ruled for the longest period of time because he had a rule with his father, Hezekiah. In the last lecture, we mentioned that Hezekiah had become ill, and Isaiah told him to put his house in order because he was going to die. But Hezekiah called out to the Lord and reminded him of what he had done, and God allowed him 15 years in addition. Now that 15 years in addition was a co-rule with his son Manasseh. In chapter 21 of 2 Kings, we read that Manasseh was 12 years old when he became king, and he reigned in Jerusalem for 55 years. Now he began to reign at a young age because Hezekiah wasn't sure about his own death. Now we are told what he did. He is a horrible example of a king of Judah. He does all of the evil things that the people did who lived there before the Israelites. And the reason that God brought them to an end was that they were so evil. Manasseh probably should have been brought to an end much sooner than he was. We are told he rebuilt the high places his father Hezekiah had destroyed. He also erected the altars to Baal, made an Asherah pole, as Ahab had done, and he bowed down to all the starry hosts and worshipped them. He built altars in the temple of the Lord, of which the Lord had said, "In Jerusalem I will put my name." There wasn't supposed to be anything in the temple except the articles for the worship of Yahweh. But he brought all kinds of extra altars to all of these other gods and put them in the temple. In verse 7, he took the carved Asherah pole he had made and put it in the temple, of which the Lord had said to David and to his son Solomon, "In this temple and in Jerusalem, which I have chosen out of all the tribes of Israel, I will put my name forever." Nothing else was supposed to be there. And then it mentions how much bloodshed he had made in the city of Jerusalem. So he was a very evil king. There isn't much other than sinful deeds that Manasseh did. In verse 16, moreover, Manasseh also shed so much innocent blood that he filled Jerusalem from end to end, besides the sin that he had caused Judah to commit, so that they did evil in the eyes of the Lord. And then he finally dies, and he is buried in the Garden of Uzzah, and Ammon, his son, succeeded him as king. It's strange as you look at the kings, when you have a good king like Hezekiah, that his son is a bad king. And then we have Ammon, who follows his father. He is a bad king, but he only lasts for a couple of years. And then he's followed by the best king, or one of the two good kings. We have Hezekiah and Josiah, who are both model kings. Why there seems to be no carryover from one king to the next. And this may be that the king really had no part in the education of the new king, but he was educated by other people. Chapter 21, verse 19, Ammon was 22 years old when he became king, and he reigned in Jerusalem 2 years. Then he was assassinated by some of his helpers. The officials then that had conspired against him were executed, and the people then made Josiah, his son, king in his place. Now Josiah is very young. He is as young as Joash when he became king, and Josiah here is 8 years old when he became king. And he reigned in Jerusalem 31 years. His mother's name was Jedidah, daughter of Adiah, and she was from Bozkath. He did what was right in the eyes of the Lord and walked in all the ways of his father David, not turning aside to the right or to the left. So here again we have the way in which they decide whether the king is good or bad. This one walked in the way of David. In the 18th year of his reign, he wants to be sure that the temple is restored. So he has the high priest take the money that has been contributed and is given to the workers. But not only do they remove articles that had been put there by Manasseh, but they also find a copy of the law. Now, we don't hear much about the law itself. In chapter 22, Hilkiah the high priest said to Shaphan the secretary, "I have found the book of the law in the temple of the Lord." He gave it to Shaphan, who read it. Then Shaphan the secretary went to the king and reported to him. And when Josiah hears the words of this book of the law, he tears his garment and puts on sackcloth. And then he sends a delegation to the prophet Huldah, the wife of the fellow who was in charge of the wardrobe. And this is in a new part of the city. In the time of Hezekiah, the northern empire was destroyed, and many of the people fled to the south and increased the size of the city of Jerusalem, and new walls had to be built in order to protect them. Well, she is in one of the new sections. In verse 12, Hilkiah the priest, Ahikam, Achbor, Shaphan, and Asaiah went to speak to the prophetess Huldah, who was the wife of Shallum, son of Tikvah, the son of Harhas, keeper of the wardrobe. She lived in Jerusalem in the 2nd district. So this is a new section of the city. And she said to him, "This is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says. Tell the man who sent you to me, this is what the Lord says, I am going to bring disaster on this place and this people, according to everything that's written in the book of the law. But," she says, "because of the action of Josiah in tearing his garments and showing repentance, it's not going to happen in his time. It will happen in the days of one of his sons." In verse 20, "Therefore I will gather you to your fathers, and you will be buried in peace. Your eyes will not see all the disaster I am going to bring on this place." And so they took her answer back to the king. Now Josiah wants to do everything that is written in the book of the law. He removed from the temple everything that should not be there. The king ordered Hilkiah the high priest, the priests next in rank, and the doorkeepers to remove from the temple of the Lord all the articles made for Baal and Asherah and all the starry hosts. All of them were taken out of the temple. And there's so many things that were there that shouldn't have been. The kings of Judah used to burn incense on the high places of the towns of Judah and those around Jerusalem, and he did away with all of these. Those that burned incense to Baal, to the sun and moon, to the constellations, and to all the starry hosts. So you can see that they were worshiping about everything other than Yahweh. He took the Asherah pole and they took it out to the Kidron Valley. And I wish somehow that the Kidron Valley could be completely excavated, because there are so many things that were taken there and burned or destroyed that were foreign to the culture of Israel. But I don't think that the Kidron Valley has ever had any excavation done. And it mentions in verse 10, he desecrated Topheth, which was in the valley of Ben Hinnom. This is the valley that is to the south of the city of Jerusalem. And this is where much of the improper worship was done. In verse 12, he pulled down the altars the kings of Judah had erected on the roof near the upper room of Ahaz, and the altars Manasseh had built in the two courts of the temple of the Lord. So you can see he had a lot of material to remove and destroy. Then we are told that he not only stayed in the area of Jerusalem, the southern kingdom of Judah, but he went north as well. It seems that he was trying to incorporate the territory that had been removed from Israel back into a united kingdom. He goes to Bethel, and that is where the shrine had been set up by Jeroboam. In verse 15, even the altar at Bethel, the high place made by Jeroboam son of Nebat, who had caused Israel to sin, even the altar and high place he demolished. He burned the high place and ground it to powder, and burned the Asherah pole also. And then Josiah looked around, and when he saw the tombs that were there on the hillside, he had the bones removed from them and burned on the altar to defile it, in accordance with the word of the Lord proclaimed by the man of God who foretold these things. Remember that we mentioned this man of God who went to Bethel and said that a man by the name of Josiah was going to come and he would destroy that shrine. And now it is taking place. The king asked, "What is that tombstone I see?" The men of the city said, "It marks the tomb of the man of God who came from Judah and pronounced against the altar of Bethel the very things you have done to it." So he said, leave it alone. Don't bother it at all. In verse 20, Josiah slaughtered all the priests of those high places on the altars and burned human bones on them. Then he went back to Jerusalem. And the people then celebrate the Passover as it should have been done every year. But we are told in verse 23, not since the days of the judges who led Israel, nor throughout the days of the kings of Israel and the kings of Judah had any such Passover been observed. But in the 18th year of King Josiah, the Passover was celebrated to the Lord in Jerusalem. Now, I'm not sure how this differed from the Passover observed by Hezekiah, but it mentions there that he was doing something that they had not done for a number of years. This is one of the 3 solemn ceremonies that were to be observed by all the men every year. And now it was done by Josiah. In verse 24, furthermore, Josiah got rid of the mediums and spiritists, the household gods, the idols, and all the other detestable things seen in Judah and Jerusalem. So Josiah is cleaning up everything. Unfortunately, Josiah did not live long enough to see this completely carried out. In verse 29, it says, while Josiah was king, Pharaoh Necho, king of Egypt, went up to help the king of Assyria by way of the Euphrates River. Assyria was the biggest kingdom, and it was followed by Babylonia. And now when Babylonia becomes a threat, Egypt turns to the aid of Assyria and tries to preserve it. Josiah didn't think that Necho should go north to help the Assyrians, so he met the army of Egypt at Megiddo. He was killed in the battle. And so the Egyptians went north, but they were unable to help the Assyrians as they had hoped. When the king came back, then he makes a change in the government of Judah. In verse 31, Jehoahaz was 23 years old when he became king, and he reigned in Jerusalem 3 months. His mother's name was Hamutal, daughter of Jeremiah. She was from Libnah. He did evil in the eyes of the Lord, just as his fathers had done. Now we mentioned that Josiah was one of the best, and then his son is again a bad king. Pharaoh took Jehoahaz and put him in chains at Riblah. There probably is a difference in the opinion of these sons of Josiah. Some favored Babylonia, some favored Egypt, and it looks like Jehoahaz was on the side of the Babylonians because he's taken by Pharaoh to Egypt, and it says that he died there. Then another son of Josiah is put on the throne. His name was Eliakim, but it was changed by Necho to Jehoiakim. So for the first few years of his reign, Jehoiakim was allied to Egypt. In verse 36, Jehoiakim was 25 years old when he became king, and he reigned in Jerusalem 11 years. His mother's name was Zebidah, daughter of Pedaiah, and she was from Rumah. He did evil in the eyes of the Lord, just as his fathers had done. He rules for a few years, and then we are told in chapter 24, verse 1, that Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, invaded the land, and Jehoiakim became his vassal for 3 years. Because of the evil of Jehoiakim, the Lord sent several other peoples against him, other than the Babylonians. Aramean, Moabite, and Ammonite raiders came against Judah. Verse 3, surely these things happened to Judah according to the Lord's command, in order to remove them from his presence, because of the sins of Manasseh and all he had done. And then we have Jehoiakim dying. We don't know exactly how he died, whether he was assassinated or removed some other way. But Jehoiakim, his son, becomes king. Now the way to tell these two apart is that the first king, Jehoiakim, ends in an M, and his son Jehoiakim ends in an N, and M comes before N in the alphabet, and also in the kingdom of Judah. We're also told that his mother's name was Nehushta, the daughter of Elnathan. She was from Jerusalem. He did evil in the eyes of the Lord, just as his father had done. In verse 13, As the Lord had declared, Nebuchadnezzar removed all the treasures from the temple of the Lord and from the royal palace, and took away all the gold articles that Solomon, king of Israel, had made for the temple of the Lord. Now, many of those things had been removed in the time of Shishak, in the time of Rehoboam. But now whatever was there that had been put there by Josiah or others was now removed by Nebuchadnezzar. In verse 15, Nebuchadnezzar takes Jehoiakim captive to Babylon. And also he took the king's mother, his wives, his officials, and the leading men of the land. This makes it very difficult for the kingdom of Judah to revolt, because most of the leadership has been removed. He also took the men that were fit for war and 1,000 craftsmen and artisans, because Nebuchadnezzar at this time was building up the city of Babylon. And then he made Mattaniah, Jehoiakim's uncle, and this is another son of Josiah, made him king in his place, and he changed his name to Zedekiah. So Mattaniah is changed to Zedekiah. Now Zedekiah is the last king of Judah. And it says that Zedekiah was 21 years old when he became king, and he reigned in Jerusalem 11 years. Now the same number of years that Jehoiakim had reigned. His mother's name was Hamutol, daughter of Jeremiah, and she was from Libnah. He did evil in the eyes of the Lord, just as Jehoiakim had done. This is because of the Lord's anger was against the nation of Judah. In chapter 25, Zedekiah rebelled against the king of Babylon. And so it says, in the 9th year of Zedekiah's reign, the 10th day of the 10th month, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, marched against Jerusalem with his whole army. He encamped outside the city and built siege works all around it. The city was kept under siege until the 11th year of King Zedekiah. Notice that sometimes these cities will take months and even years to be brought down. The city of Jerusalem fell, and you can read in the book of Jeremiah how he is advising Zedekiah the king, surrender to the Babylonians. If you surrender, the city will not be destroyed. But Zedekiah is afraid of the nobles, and so he waits until it is too late. And then we are told that the city walls are broken through, and that the king, Zedekiah, and some of his army tried to escape by going through a wall in his garden and headed towards Jericho. But he is pursued by the Babylonians. He is captured, and then he is taken to Nebuchadnezzar at Riblah. In verse 11, Nebuzaradan, the commander of the guard, carried into exile the people who remained in the city, along with the rest of the populace and those who had gone over to the king of Babylon. Jeremiah mentions several of the people who had surrendered to the Babylonians earlier. And Zedekiah says he's afraid of those people, and that's one of the reasons why he himself did not surrender. Some of the poorest people of the land were left to take care of the vineyards and the fields. And the Babylonians broke up the bronze pillars, the movable stands from the temple, the bronze sea, in the temple of the Lord. They carried all of this bronze to Babylonia. Even the censers and the sprinkling bowls were taken away. And all vessels that were of gold or silver were removed. The king of Babylon appointed Gedaliah as a governor, and since the city of Jerusalem was destroyed, he resided in Mizpah. Then those military commanders who happened to be in the field at the time of the fall of Jerusalem went to Gedaliah, and they pledged their support of him. However, in the 7th month, Ishmael, son of Nethaniah, the son of Elishama, who was of royal blood, assassinated Gedaliah and the men of Judah and the Babylonians who were with them at Mizpah. Then the rest of the people went to Egypt because they feared reprisal from the king of Babylon. Here again, you'll find in the book of Jeremiah that they asked Jeremiah to find out for them what they should do. And when he told them, stay in the land, then they didn't do what he said. They made up their own mind beforehand that they were going to go to Egypt. One very interesting comment made at the end of 2 Kings is about Jehoiakim. We mentioned that he was captured by Nebuchadnezzar and taken to Babylon. And he was in prison in Babylon for many years. And then in the 37th year of the exile of Jehoiakim, and he had been in prison for that long, in the year Evil Merodach, or Awil Marduk in the Babylonian, he became king of Babylon. He released Jehoiakim from prison on the 27th day of the 12th month, and Jehoiakim then ate at his table with the king himself, and he had an allowance given to him by the king. A record of that has been found in the archaeological material that states that Jehoiakim was given a specific amount by the king of Babylon.